Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here at my next Star Wars video. This video, I suppose it's going to be my kind of final thoughts on The Force Awakens. Uh, I maybe will do a video when like the Blu-ray DVD comes out, talking about if like special features reveal anything new of note. But for the most part, I want this video to kind of be my final thoughts on the movie. Obviously, over the past couple of weeks, you've seen me do analysis videos on like specific parts of the movies, and for the most part, I think I've covered everything I need to. And then you've obviously had my like initial impressions video, like the day after I saw the movie. But now I'm ready to, I have my thoughts finalized on this movie. So let's get into that. I'll start with my negatives, criticisms of the movie, because I have very much less criticisms of the movie and then way more positives to talk about. So I'll get the negatives out of the way so we can end on a high note. Um, the main negative I think I have with this movie, is that it was vague about so much of the world building stuff. I think they made the mistake of listening too much to the people who went into the Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, and saw that the crawlers were mentioning politics stuff, and decided to go completely away from that. And they went so far away from it that it was hard to understand, just based on the movie, what the two sides were, the state of the galaxy at this point in time, and so on. They were extremely vague about that, to the point where a lot of people came out of this movie, a lot of just casual Star Wars fans who aren't going to read any of the extra material, come out of this movie just being like, what was the point in changing the Empire to the First Order? What was the point changing the Rebellion to the Resistance? Is it just a change in name? There's a line here or there that kind of explain what each side is at this point in time, but they go so little into depth in terms of that I think it does the movie a disservice actually going in. I think the crawler should have explained that, should explain the name changes and stuff like that. It should have much better explained the difference between the New Republic and the Resistance, why Leia is not a part of the new government, and what exactly the role of the First Order is in the galaxy. If you look at the extra material out there, you completely understand the situation. That the Republic roughly supports the Resistance. There are a lot of people who are kind of against Leia because they believe that the Resistance is just as guilty of the First Order Empire at trying to keep the war going. So they kind of support them because they see some threats out there and need that, but for the most part they don't really give them the support. Which is why you have the lines in the movie of like Leia explaining that like, are we getting help from the Republic? No. Why you see a couple of people when the planet, the Hosnian system is destroyed, Hosnian Prime, when you see that destroyed, some of the people there, like the girl is meant to be the envoy from the Resistance to the Republic requesting aid, but that plot point obviously was kind of cut out of the movie. All we do is see her die, and there's no real reference to the fact that, oh, one member of the Resistance was killed on that planet. And they didn't even make a mention of like that the alien guy we see on that planet is the Supreme Chancellor. I get why they didn't want to have the politics be as much of a focus as the prequels, but it just, I don't think, built the world correctly at this point in time. There's just a lot of vagueness going on that I didn't quite like, to the point where like when I read Before the Awakening, the novelization prequel, and got the whole idea that okay, Poe was initially a pilot in the Republic and he disagreed with their views on the Resistance and the First Order, so he then with some help from Leia joined the Resistance, that they're not linked inherently, I suppose. That was a kind of little bit of a shock and kind of eye opener for me. Like, oh, I didn't quite get that from the movie. The First Order, again, they don't go into detail about the fact that as part of the, I suppose, peace treaty that basically ended the war between the rebellion and the Empire was forced to demilitarize down to like 10 or 20% of what they initially had. So they did. So they didn't just wipe out that organization; they were still there. And then I still don't think it's been fully explained how it came to form, but the idea is obviously that the what was left of the Empire then became the First Order, and they went against the rules that were set in place, the demilitarization stuff, which is why Starkiller Base is such a threat. The Republic don't know about it, but the Resistance do, and the Resistance see the First Order as a threat, whereas the Republic doesn't seem to think it's that big of a deal, and that's why people like Poe, people like Leia are so eager to end the threat of the First Order, which is adds more kind of credence to the line that Maz Kanata says, like evil takes many forms. In the past it was like the Sith, the Empire. Now it's the First Order. They should have done a much better job at doing that and not left all of that to the expanded universe. Because say what you will about the prequels, they gave you the information that you needed to figure out the politics, which was definitely a good thing overall. So by the end of the first three movies, episode 1, 2, and 3, you knew what Palpatine had done to gain power and to manipulate everything to get what he wanted. I don't feel I know anything about the workings of the Resistance or the First Order. And I think that is a big negative that I haven't seen a lot of people mention, but I think it was a bad move, and I think in earlier drafts of the script and stuff like that, I think there were perhaps scenes like the novelization does a better job of explaining this, obviously, than the movie. So I definitely think that was a problem. Something I mentioned in earlier videos that I still think is an issue, but it's not as big of an issue as I kind of maybe initially made it out to be, and a lot of other people are making it out to be. That this movie is very similar to A New Hope. It's very, very similar in terms of the beats that it hits over the course of the movie to the originals. And I definitely have some problems with that, because what I really liked about the prequels was that we went into them and there was so much new stuff. Like, all of the ships were new. We got to see the Jedi in their prime. You're seeing all this new stuff, new planets and stuff like that. And that's what was unique about the prequels. Even if you didn't like the way they did the story, I think there was a uniqueness to the fact that you got to see all these new and interesting types of ships, new and interesting planets. Whereas we immediately go back to episode 7 and we're seeing roughly the same places. Takodana is, I wouldn't say it's quite exactly like Endor, but a foresty type planet. Jakku is basically Tatooine. They don't do a whole lot to differentiate it all that much. And just in general like that, just the planets that we get to see, Starkiller Base is like, okay, it's a more natural environment for a giant space station that's built out of a planet rather than just being a space station the size of a moon. But it's still, like, the environment didn't really have much appeal to it. I don't have too much of a problem with some of the story beats they hit, like Rey being similar to Luke. I don't really have much of a problem there. The whole idea of the droid carrying information, no problem there. And then just some of that other stuff that I like as we go on. The death of a kind of master type figure, and like for Rey it was Han and stuff like that. That spurs the hero on to continue their mission. I don't have any problem with that. As I said before, my problems with the similarities ultimately I think came down to Starkiller Base and how it was destroyed. It was just, the big kind of faction versus faction battle at the end of the movie comes down to having to destroy another giant battle station thing. Three out of like the 4 movies kind of that aren't the prequels deal with that. Admittedly, the Phantom Menace has a similar scene with the destruction of the droid control ship. Well, that ship is different enough, and the way they do the scene and like how it happens is different enough that it kind of works and isn't as bad as like, okay, we have Death Star 2, now Starkiller Base, and like, okay, trench run, run through the ship, and then you have trench run plus kind of run through the ship in this one with Poe. It was like a cool scene for Poe, of course, but it was just like, I think you could have done something so much more interesting if you organized a different battle around Starkiller Base. Uh, it was to the point where when it was destroyed, I didn't care. I cared when the first Death Star was destroyed. I don't have too much of an attachment to the second Death Star. I was like, okay, this is the only other Death Star they have built. Cool. Return of the Jedi has that's a nice finale for Lando to destroy the second Death Star. But Starkiller Base, just like, it felt like we're doing the same thing again. I don't care about this. By the end of the movie, I don't have any idea about how big of a blow to the First Order this actually is. How big of a victory for the Resistance is this? Is this half of the First Order's kind of like military power gone, most of it, or just a small part of a bigger picture? That's the problem that relates to the vagueness of the movie I mentioned earlier on. I don't know what the First Order really is, because they don't explain it. What exactly it is. Like I understand why they don't want to go into Snoke and stuff like that. The backstory of him that will come, I suppose, in time, but just the general idea of what the size of this organization is, I didn't get a good idea of. So the end of this movie felt very flat to me because it was almost shot for shot at times identical to A New Hope, parts of Return of the Jedi and stuff like that. So there's that. So it's one of the things where like I get what I wanted to be fairly similar to the originals, to bring the people who didn't like the prequels back in and just be like, okay, we're going to do the different stuff in episode 8 and 9, and this is just to get people back in, to prove we can make a good Star Wars movie that can be successful. Fine, but as I said, there were a lot of similarities that I didn't mind, but it was just some of them you went way too far with it. Like even Maz Kanata's castle as like the new cantina type thing, I didn't mind that because they kind of brushed by it fairly quickly. It was different in its own way. I liked how the big Rey moment of her suddenly becoming the main character happens in the basement of like basically the cantina scene of this movie. That was an interesting kind of twist on things. So there's that. I didn't mind a good deal of the similarities, but some of them were just way too much in terms of being overly similar. The only other complaint I'd have would just be the ships. Like, we're 30 years on from the originals, and we're still using X-wings. We're still using TIE fighters. New models, and they have different color patterns and stuff like that. But really, they for the most part look identical. Like the only difference on the X-wings is really the way the engines are. Like, why wasn't there any advancement? Again, to me, that just feels like we have to appeal to the original trilogy crowd. That's all we can do. Admittedly, there are kind of expanded universe reasons in the sense of like, oh, the Resistance actually has older models of X-wing, but they're still many models on from what the Rebellion had. So they're still fairly new, but it's still like 20 years on basically. It's I just wanted to see a couple more new ships. That was something that was always interesting with the prequels. In like episode 1 you had like the Naboo starfighters. Episode 2 you had the new kind of the Jedi starfighter. And then you had the even newer kind of a Jedi starfighter towards the end of the Clone Wars in episode 3. And plus, like, you had vulture droids and stuff like that as you went on, tri-droids and stuff like that. The ships were different in each movie. There was a clear advancement of technology, and now it just seems like, oh, we have new engines on the X-Wings. The TIE fighters are even cooler black now. It's just like, that would have added something new to the overly similar trench run scene. To see like Poe piloting a different type of ship, to see how it does its own unique characteristics rather than just, oh, it's another X-Wing, we know how powerful they are, that's fine. So there was that. And then just some more kind of smaller complaints, like I wasn't the biggest fan of the lightsaber fight, as I've said before. I think the choreography. I think I get a lot. There's a lot of beginners involved in the fight. There's someone who's injured, but I still think the choreography could have been a bit better done. And in general, I felt there was a better way to approach doing aspects of that fight in terms of the power level of Rey once she connects to the Force, and how she goes about defeating Kylo. I felt they went a little too far in terms of making Rey extremely powerful, and it only to me served to knock Kylo down a peg or two rather than make Rey look better. I think it was a scene that didn't make Kylo look the best, when I think he should have been like overwhelmed by her temporary burst of power, but like a continuous duel with her having the advantage and like just dominating him, I think was a bit too far to go. So I've explained in a previous video how I felt the scene should have gone, so I won't go into that here, but I just felt that little changes to that duel would have made it perfect for me. You get the same effect of like Rey has beaten Kylo, but not the idea that she's just outdueled him and stuff like that. And you still get the same effect of like this newcomer has defeated the kind of somewhat veteran character. So there's that. And for the most part, that's it. Some of the other stuff with Rey, like I think the mind trick scene, while funny, to me was like they let the joke kind of win in the scene at the expense of the logic of like that's a pretty delicate force technique. I don't see how she could learn that in like the 3 minutes we see on screen. Um, but from there, let's get into the positives. I may have seemed a bit critical there, like rambling for like 15 minutes about the negatives about the movie. The fact that there are 15 minutes of negatives, and I've already said that there are way more positives, is a pretty big deal. I love this movie. I want to make that very clear. That I went to see this movie 4 times. I was busy. Otherwise, I would have went to see it a couple more times. I'm absolutely getting this movie on like Blu-ray when it comes out, and I'm really eager to see it again. I want to see what the deleted scenes are, and as you've probably seen from other content on my channel, it's got me much more interested in like other Star Wars stuff, Star Wars comics, Star Wars books, and so on. So this movie was really kind of reignited, like my passion for Star Wars, which was always there. It's just like the movie being as good as it was, like made me go like, Star Wars is awesome. I need everything kind of sort of way. So yeah, I think the best thing in this movie is the new characters. I think they were all so well cast. Their stories seem very well plotted out already. Some more so than others. I adored Rey's arc throughout this movie. She's absolutely one of my favorite Star Wars characters of all time. Obviously, whether I say she's actually my favorite depends on where exactly they go with her, but right now, the potential as a character that she has is so amazing that I just can't wait to see the next bit of content that has the next part of Rey's story in it. Because obviously, as I said before, the marketing of this movie leads you to believe that Rey is going to be like our secondary main character. She's going to be very important, but only our secondary main character. They're promoting Finn as the Jedi. Like, Rey's going to be cool, but like Finn's the Jedi. So the twist when she's the one who has the lightsaber vision, she's the one who uses the Force to call the lightsaber to her at the end, using the Jedi mind tricks, defeating Kylo Ren. She's the one to go and get Luke. That was amazing to see that journey for the character. To me, it kind of blew Luke's journey out of the water. Just this movie versus Luke across those 3 movies, to me, it was so much better. I connected with the character so much more, just because there's so much, to me, more going on with Rey. Like, a lot of the mystery, of course, makes her an interesting character. To know, like, who left her there? Does she have any history with the Jedi before? Like, a lot of people are speculating. Has she previously been trained and is suddenly now remembering a lot of it, but it's been kind of blocked by someone, or what? Like, there's a mystery to her. Like, who is she? What's her second name? Is she related to any character we know, or is she just a kind of random Force user who happens to be very powerful and is going to be this kind of random person who comes onto the scene and changes the fate of the galaxy or whatever. Like that, there's so much potential for his story, and like where they ended with her and Luke was a great decision to do that. Like, you don't know what the relationship is, but you hope it's going to be this really cool master apprentice relationship, and it makes Luke so much more interesting that like he's in the position that he's in. But for Rey, you want her to succeed from the first scene that you see of her. You care for her and want her to succeed because you see her staying on this planet for personal reasons that you can understand, but you also understand that like it's been so long and she's so capable that you want her to kind of leave. And so when Finn arrives on the scene and she goes with him, you kind of realize this is where she's meant to be, but she's so linked to the planet, what happens with her parents. So find out from Maz basically that you have to know they're not coming back, but you've just discovered on this little journey already you have a new destiny. That was really good. That was so well done. She's absolutely my favorite character from the movie. Not to say that Poe and Finn aren't as good as her. They're still, like, I'm surprised Poe has such a rabid fan base despite his kind of low screen time. But I agree, he's a really cool character, and he's probably one of the best pilots we've seen in the Star Wars universe. We'll have to see what they do with him in episode 8 and 9, but I think he's already up there with the likes of like Luke and Anakin. But really cool what they did with him. I loved the relationship that developed very quickly between Finn and Poe, that friendship, and how they, even though they're on opposite sides, they could both see something in each other that kind of just made them trust each other. It was nice that they didn't need like a whole movie to make them trust each other. It was just like done. I really like that. And then Finn as kind of like the character who kind of gets the story going. He's the one who brings a lot of the pieces together. We kind of follow him for the most part. And then towards the end of the movie, like, we switch to like, okay, Rey's our main character, but Finn is still important. Again, like, he has like the opposite journey to Rey, that we think he's the main character, we think he's the Jedi, but it turns and he's not. He has to be defended by Rey, and that relationship is also very well done. Just Finn is trying to run away from the First Order and doesn't feel like he's at home anywhere. But the whole movie, he doesn't realize that what he's run into, basically the Resistance, this group of people fighting against the First Order, that's what he needs to join. And the fact that he doesn't realize it, even by the end of the movie, he doesn't fully realize that he's found where he needs to be, is really interesting. So where they pick up with him in the next movie is going to be fascinating to see. Is he just like going to be like, okay, I'm part of the Resistance now, it's fine? Or is he going to be more attached to Rey and want to find her and see what she's up to? Or will he stick and be loyal with the Resistance? That's interesting. And I do think they've set up a fight for him with like Phasma down the line, which is interesting. But for the most part, I really liked the character. He was funny. His interactions with all the characters were really well done. And again, another very relatable character with a kind of clear arc for them to go for. But left in a position at the end of this movie where it's very open for what they can do with him going forward. So I really like that. I'm not going to cover every character. The original cast, I really like what they did with them. I said before, in terms of the build-up to this movie, that I really had to be sold on what they were doing with the old cast, because to me the new characters felt so much more interesting. But I was really happy with how well they did Han Solo. To me, this is his most interesting movie. He has the most main of his roles in any of the Star Wars movies here, and it was so well done to see him interact with Chewie, interact with Rey, his kind of comedic relationship with Finn, and then his relationship with his son, and just to see that they had some complexity to that relationship with Leia that you thought was just going to be happy forever. But no, they had issues in their lives, and they were together for a while, they had a son, but they separated, went their own ways, and this is them coming back together. that relationship was well done. Carrie Fisher's performance as Leia was, small, but I think it showed that she can get back into that role very effectively. And the I'd hope she has a more expanded role in Episode 8. We get to see more of what she can do, especially now with the death of Han. There's potential there, and how she feels about her son, and potentially if what the relationship that they go for with her and Finn, her and Rey, and stuff like that. And then of course Luke, even though we don't get to hear him speak, just that one scene, the music, the scene building up to his appearance, the whole movie building up to his appearance was very well done, setting up that before you even meet him, you're aware that bad stuff has happened. He want the dream of like continuing the Jedi Order, bringing it back. He had it, but then it was all taken away because of Kylo, and now he's kind of in exile, but they need him back. And Rey is the only one who can bring him back. It's fascinating going into Episode 8 to see what they do with Luke. And I suppose I'm going to finish up with Kylo Ren, because I've touched on a little bit of everything, I think, for the most part. Kylo, I think, is a really cool villain. Ultimately, I suppose Snoke behind the scenes is their main villain, in that Kylo, you obviously have the potential for him to switch sides, given that he's having the opposite of most of our kind of main character arcs of like the light side user being pulled to the darkness and falling to the dark side. This time he is dark side, but he's being pulled towards the light. And will he become the hero that I suppose he was kind of destined perhaps to become? And just the idea that they're continuing this kind of cursed lineage of the Skywalkers, that they are very prone to the balance of the Force and the pull of the side that they're not on and stuff like that. So it's really interesting what they do with him, and his relationship with Snoke. And again, like Rey, a lot of mysteries behind what exactly happened. Why was he apparently so easily convinced to turn on Luke and all the Jedi, kill them, and then towards the end of the movie, of course, kill his father? But obviously there's more character stuff behind that, which I'll get into in just a second. But just this idea that, like, okay, he grew up in... Well, on before his betrayal, it seemed like the family was happy. Han and Leia, fine, and they had him. But something just happened, and he was beginning to look like he was being pulled to the dark side from a very young age. And for whatever reason, Snoke got into his head, told him some stuff, and he sided with the dark side. He chose that early on, and that's what he's known for all this time. And he's trying to become like Darth Vader, trying to become the complete Darth Vader that didn't make the mistake at the end. And so he tries to make up for that by killing his father, but it doesn't work. Killing Han doesn't make Kylo more powerful. It seemed to have made him weaker, in that he's doubting more things now that I killed him, why am I more powerful? He's beginning to doubt, like, is the dark side the more powerful side? When Rey is a light side, and she's just defeated me here with, like, an hour of training. Like, what's happening here? And that's fascinating to see what his training with Snoke is going to be between the movies versus what Rey's training is going to be, and how they come to fight against each other, and what the nature of their conflict is. That's the most amazing thing about all of these movies. About this movie, that all of the main cast is interesting. There's something set up that we don't know. They had a solid arc within this movie, but there's so much more to learn about them in terms of Episode 8 and 9. And that's not something we've really had for a while in Star Wars, because with the originals, there was only a certain amount of speculation that you could have for the characters after the end of each movie. With the prequels, we knew where everything was going to end up, so we knew the kind of end. We just needed to see basically the beginning and how it was gradually going to get to that point, Anakin becoming Darth Vader. But with these characters, there's stuff set up at the end of this movie for them, and we don't know what the end point is. That's a whole new experience, I think, for a lot of Star Wars fans, and that this modern style of storytelling with cliffhangers and stuff like that, there's so much to speculate about going into Episode 8 and 9. And that's probably one of the biggest positives about this thing as well, is that from a kind of not talking directly about the movie perspective, just in terms of the fan reaction to it, this movie is getting a lot of people talking for a much longer amount of time than I think any of the other movies, because there's so much to speculate about, because the characters are so intriguing and mysterious. They instantly draw more discussion than just, oh, Luke at the end of episode 4, he's part of the rebellion now, cool, what's happening next? There's not a whole lot to speculate about. This time, though, stuff about Rey, stuff about Kylo, where's Finn gonna go? What's Poe gonna do next? Who is Snoke? What's the First Order like now? And so on. But I suppose ending the review, I think the positives of just how good the characters are, the story that's set up here, outweighs a lot of the negatives that I had. I do hope the movie 8 and 9 improve on stuff like world building, establishing the sides, and just making it more clear what's happening in the world. Because we have skipped ahead 30 years. That's a very long time. I think that's the biggest time skip we've had between any of the movies. I think going from prequels to originals is only like 20 years. This is the longest time skip we've had, yet it's when we return after the time skip, we are informed about the least amount of change in the galaxy. That's the problem, I think, that they really need to tackle in the next movie. They need to make it very clear the nature of both sides. Is the Republic even a thing in Episode 8? How strong are the Resistance? And how strong are the First Order going into this next movie? That's a very confusing thing coming out of this movie. I hope they don't try and make it overly similar to any of the other movies. I think with 8, they have to make it its own movie, and it should never be a complaint about Episode 8 that it feels in any way similar to the other movies. They have to start taking a few more risks, I think, now that they've had that kind of felt like home movie in Episode 7. So that's about all I wanted to say. That covers basically all of my thoughts on the movie. You know, there's a ton of little things I'm forgetting about, but you can watch my previous Star Wars videos to get my other thoughts on that. For now, in terms of an in-depth review of the movie, that's basically how I feel. Characters are so strong that it basically eclipses everything else in terms of how I feel, good or bad. The characters are just so well done, especially Rey. So that's been the review. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the movie now that it's been out for a long time, and it's about time to get our final thoughts in place about the movie. But yeah, that's probably going to be the last Force Awakens video, as I said, at least until the DVD Blu-ray comes out, and if there's anything there to talk about, I'll definitely mention it. And as the big news about, obviously, Rogue One, Episode 8 comes out, I'll do updates when the big stuff comes out, like trailers and reaction videos, that sort of thing. So yeah, I will be continuing to obviously do some sort of coverage about the new movies. Not gonna like cover every single tiny bit of news, just the big stuff. So that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.